My name is Christina McClellan, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
I'm the Chief Curator at the University of Iowa
Marin,
Museum of Art, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
Gigi Durham. I'm an Associate Professor in the School of Journalism, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
Welcome to the third season of Women at Iowa, a show that explores the work, experience, and history of women on the University of Iowa campus. I'm your host, Anna Bostwick Fleming, and our guest today is Monique DiCarlo, who is Sexual Misconduct Response Coordinator for the University of Iowa Office of the President and Office of the Vice President of Student Services. She's also the 2010 winner of the Jean Jew Women's Rights Award. Monique, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with asking you about how you first came to the University of Iowa. I know you went to college at Augustana in Illinois and that you got your master's in social work from the University of Michigan. So why Iowa?
Well, actually, while in between my undergraduate and graduate experience, I actually lived and worked in the Quad Cities, and so I was familiar with a small organization called the Women's Resource and Action Center at the University of Iowa, mostly because I would refer clients or utilize other resources, and went to some of the trainings that the Women Against Racism Committee provided. So I was familiar with the center, and while I was then in graduate school, beginning my job search, the directorship of the Women's Center was open, and I decided to apply, and was very pleased to be selected.
So as you said, prior to coming to Iowa City, you were working in Davenport at the Domestic Violence Advocacy Program, and you were a social worker and a supervisor there. I wonder if you could tell me about some of the challenges that you faced in those roles.
Yeah, actually that professional experience started out as a student internship. When you get your undergraduate degree in social work, you're required to do a practicum. And so for me, my experience in the field and my experience with that agency started actually as a student, and eventually I became the program supervisor director of the domestic violence program. And so in many ways I felt like I grew up there professionally because I worked there for 7 years. And some of the gifts that opportunity provided was that I wasn't just responding or learning about domestic violence. Family Resources, where the program is hosted, or the larger family service agency, has a number of programs that are reaching out to families in that area. So I learned about marriage and family counseling, but specifically in working with youth and other things as well, other challenges in the community. But I think when I reflect back is that we were at a pivotal time in 1986. You know, the issue was no longer just a grassroots movement issue. It had successfully, because of the women that came before, very much become a mainstream issue. And that meant family service agencies were hosting organizations or programs to address the need. So in many ways, there was things were easier. You didn't have to raise awareness about what domestic violence was. There was some knowledge of what the challenges were. But when I think back, there were certainly funding challenges similar to what you would see today. I remember when I first came on as a paid staff member, there was a new president at that time that had come in about a year before and wiped out the national office, the first national office on domestic violence, which meant I wasn't sure if my position was going to continue. And certainly there wasn't a lot of coordination and communication between systems that were responding. So law enforcement kind of had its perspective, a prosecuting attorney's office had its own perspective, and agencies like ours had its perspective on providing 24-hour crisis intervention. So, you know, certainly a challenge was coordination and understanding how all of those systems worked so that you could provide the best service to victims and to hold offenders accountable and help them make change, as well as the children who witnessed that issue.
So after working there in 1994, you came to the Women's Resource and Action Center, and you held the position of director of RACT for 15 years.
Almost 15, yeah.
For almost 15 years. So looking back over that time, I wonder if you could maybe point out some of the great successes that you experienced over those 15 years, and maybe also some of the disappointments.
Sure. You might have to remind me about the other part too. But the successes are really, for me, first I think the privilege of getting to work with such a talented staff and people who've been in the work for a really long time, learning from them, growing. And then working with student interns, practicum students, volunteers, they just change your life. Their involvement in the work and how the work changed their life, their direction as far as their course of study or their career aspirations. That was definitely a benefit, a privilege of getting to be there. Some of the successes and the exciting times were certainly when you would bring in national speakers, but even just the smaller workshops that we would do in the back room, hearing people talk about their personal stories or struggles and getting access to new information or specifically building a new skill to make their own lives better, whether that was through a support group or through using counseling services. Some of the programmatic, I think, successes or things that I will always look back on, I think, fondly would be the start of both the program called Iowa Women Initiating Social Change, the Men's Anti-Violence Council, the Iowa New Leadership Program, the Social Change Training Program, and certainly others like helping to support the Women's Music Festival and other projects and programs that we were doing in the community, like the Women in Money series. All of those things were big successes, and in large part to the collaborations that were involved in bringing them to fruition.
And then some of the disappointments.
Yeah, I think some of the disappointments are, you look back and you wish that you could have went deeper on an issue, maybe been more focused, less breadth, maybe more depth in working on an issue from a social justice perspective, which I think as I think back about the last 5 years, I think I was more focused on kind of really focusing in on some programmatic areas, and that probably had to do with my own personal need of wanting to go deeper on issues. I think we can, as a movement and as a center, there's always a challenge to see the interconnections between oppressions, and I think just disappointments, maybe missed opportunities of working more collaboratively or deeply with communities of color, people with disabilities, the LGBT community. Certainly we did that, and I think we were known for doing it well, but I think we could always do that work better. And hindsight is so helpful sometimes in that you can see what you would do better, and hopefully you use that to inform your work in the future.
So I want to circle back to some of those programs about which you're so proud, and I want to ask you about what sort of work they did and why that was important to the mission of RAC and to your personal mission.
Yeah, I definitely believe that my training and early professional opportunities, volunteer opportunities, really shaped me in knowing that what feeds my soul and what gives me energy in my work is being engaged in both individual empowerment, seeing people make change in their own personal lives, as well as working on systemic change, social justice issues, asking why do those problems exist in people's lives in the first place, and what can we do collectively to make change. And so I think that very much was and is the mission of the center, to kind of engage in that work both from a service and programming perspective. And so when I think about the Social Change Training Program or the Iowa Initiating Social Change Program, which really was developed to teach undergraduate women skills, community organizing skills, we taught them 3 different methods of doing social justice work, and then supported them to pick an issue, and then they were to use the methods that we taught to try and make change in the community. It was, while I wasn't intricately involved because we hired a coordinator to work with the women participants, it was fun from a distance even to see how the work that they were doing at the community level was making a difference, but also watching how the work changed them, and then getting emails back years later from them about how it changed their course, their life path. And that's you can't ask for something better than that, when you know that you're helping people and making a difference, and at the same time working to make the community stronger.
So in 2008, while you were still director of RAC, you became the interim sexual assault response coordinator, and then in 2009 you became the full-time sexual misconduct response coordinator. So tell me a little bit about what you do in that position.
Well, the first and foremost priority, I think, in creating the position was the president wanted to ensure that there was a central place that someone could go to report an experience with sexual misconduct, in particular sexual assault. So to ensure that there would be one place is kind of the role that I serve, and to ensure that when someone isn't clear about whether or not there's a law enforcement or criminal justice process going on in a case and or a university investigation, those processes can be happening at the same time. There's similar language, there's different language. So it's a coordinating aspect, making sure that the complainant or the victim is aware of the process or processes that they're involved in, what their rights are, what their options are for resources and services like a 24 victim advocate from a place like RVAP, the Rape Victim Advocacy Program, or the Domestic Violence Intervention Program. So making those linkages. In addition, I help with accommodations. So under policy and actually law, victims have some rights as far as accessing a housing accommodation. So if they're not safe in the space, or it's just really disturbing to them to be in a location where the assault occurred, trying to assist them, particularly if they're living on campus, with accessing a different location to live. Academic accommodations, so if someone's having a hard time focusing, working with faculty members or instructors on assisting the student so the student can be successful in their classroom.
So you deal with a lot of really difficult stories in this position and in some of the other positions you've held. How do you find hope in your work?
Well, I think the strength of every person that comes forward to tell his or her story is really powerful, and it's a gift. When someone chooses to be vulnerable and chooses to share what had happened to them, sometimes it's hard, and it goes to the core of, your own emotions, and you think about people in your life and hope that people are safe and well. I think what gives me hope is watching how people recover. That's not maybe the right way to say it, but heal, and how they take control back in their life. That definitely is a source of renewal. And so being a part of somebody's process, even if it's the beginning where they're telling what happened and asking for some type of help or justice or the ability to hold the offender accountable, certainly feeds me in being a part of that process. But I think it's also watching their strength and watching them call on the strengths that they have. But the other aspect is similar to what I talked about earlier with the Women's Center, in that even in this position, the job description includes working on more systemic change, looking at policy issues, looking at protocol, looking at things more systemically and how we can improve, either encouraging people to come forward and ask for help, encouraging our ability to hold people accountable to make change and make our campus community safer. Those are things that give me hope as well. We just did a seminar earlier this week, where we had over 90 people registered and attended. We had to close the workshop because of fire capacity in the room or whatever, fire marshal rules. And it was focused on, the goal was to encourage people to understand what the various systems' responsibilities were in responding to domestic violence or dating violence. So there were law enforcement, prosecuting attorneys, an advocate, and then we had the dean of students talking about the university response, the judicial affairs or process in responding to student misconduct, and seeing the ways people engage in those learning opportunities and understanding that good things can come from people better understanding each other's roles and understanding the process as a whole gives me hope.
So the university just revised its sexual misconduct policy. What did you learn from that process?
A lot. I think what I learned is that while policies, you can look at best practices, you can look at what the research says, you can listen to what experiences were, what victims' experiences were, and use all of that to inform what your policy, what laws are, to inform what your policy should be. But in the end, what matters most, in addition to having a strong and responsive and current policy, is how the offices that are responsible for implementing the policy, how well they understand their role, how well they communicate and collaborate in implementing the spirit of the policy. And that piece became really clear to me, that you can have the best policies, but if you don't have people who are trained or people who are communicating, if territorialism gets in the way of actually responding, it doesn't serve anyone, no matter how good your policy is.
So I want to ask you about the Stoller report. How does that influence the way you approach your position?
There are a number of things that influence my position. That report is one of them. And I think what I learned from that report is specifically how important it is that that it's really clear what people's responsibilities are, and that there's not only an understanding of your own responsibility, but that you have an understanding, you have empathy, and you understand the other office's perspective or framework. Law enforcement is looking at an issue from a criminal perspective, and they're building a case, and they're trying to determine, was a law broken? But an advocate's role isn't necessarily concerned with whether a crime occurred, but respecting self-determination and what does the victim need as they're coming forward. And it's not really an advocate's role to be worried whether what kind of crime or what the crime was, but to help the other systems do their job well, but also the victim as they're coming forward. And I think that's what the report emphasized for me most, and why I continue to refer to that report, as well as looking at the Council on the Status of Women's Sexual Harassment Survey, and understanding that one of the key findings in that report or that study was that people didn't know where to go when they experienced some type of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. Knowing that, then you use that to inform how can we get the word out better, how can we better reach our first-year students who are perhaps more vulnerable for experiencing sexual assault, for instance, and thinking more critically about the system, the university as a whole, and what resources and strengths do we have, like this show, to share information and ensure people have access to what they need.
So some of our previous guests on the show have linked alcohol consumption to an increased rate of sexual assault. And of course, Iowa City.
You can actually pick it up right from the beginning of your question. Just look at your guest and start when you're ready.
Yep. So some of our previous guests have linked alcohol consumption to rates of sexual assault. And of course, Iowa City has continually considered whether or not it should allow people under the age of 21 into its bars. What do you think the solution is?
Well, speaking for myself, I really do believe that the ordinance preventing people under 21 is an important piece of the puzzle in trying to create a healthier and safer campus. I also think that alcohol use or misuse is linked in many sexual assault, sexual misconduct, even domestic violence cases. There's a higher percentage. I don't think there's a causal relationship, so I want to be really careful. So if we somehow solve a binge drinking problem or prevent alcoholism and drug addiction in our society sometime in the future, I still think we'll struggle with these other issues if we don't address them separately. But that said, I think it's a huge piece of the puzzle as far as ensuring that our campus and our community is safer and more respectful. I also think that I'm concerned when I hear people frame an issue that, and particularly use women's vulnerability or need for safety as a way to support one or the other position. I'm particularly now disturbed that I'm hearing business owners suggest that people are going to be in house parties and it's going to be more dangerous for women particularly. And I don't think that addresses the root cause of violence in women's lives or anyone's life by pitting the issue in such a dichotomy. I understand that reality, there's an ordinance that we're looking at, and that there's going to be a vote and you have to make a decision. But when it comes to addressing violence in people's lives, interpersonal violence, I get really worried that, to suggest that the solution is that people need to be drinking or partying in one place versus another, that somehow that's going to solve our safety issue, I actually find offensive.
Often the cases of sexual assault that get the most publicity are related to athletes. And of course, University of Iowa has several ranked teams. I want to ask you about the challenges and about the assumptions that you have to deal with related to the issue of sexual assault in sports.
Yeah, I think that, that this is an important issue. I think when we frame the issue that somehow athletes or men in fraternities, those are two issues that come up, are more violent, I think it's important to look at what the research says, not just what the headlines say, and not just what your experience at your undergraduate school has been with some high-profile case. Those are tragic, and they happen. But the research also says that it's not just fraternities or athletes that are more violent, it's that it's a problem in our social construction of masculinity. And so the issue is groups of men are at a greater risk of perpetuating beliefs that allow or encourage violence in women's lives. And it's the norms within that group that matter. So it can be a group of an engineering organization of men, an all-male group that could be just as vulnerable for perpetuating violent stereotypes or using violence in their relationships with women or with men. So what's really important is that we, from an educational perspective, get people to think about what would they do in a situation, what would people like them do, and to do bystander education, to kind of really confront what the norms are, what they believe. The single biggest predictor I've learned from folks like Jared Kuhn, who run the Men's Anti-Violence Council at the Women's Center, is that one of the biggest predictors of whether or not men particularly will step up and intervene in a situation is whether they believe men like them will intervene or not use that tactic to get a date. And so it's important when you step up and you say that's not okay, or you intervene in some way, get help in a situation. You're not only helping that person who might be in a dangerous situation, but you're communicating to folks around you that people like us step up and we speak out on this issue, and that's critical. And I actually believe the research says that that's probably the most effective way to prevent violence in women's lives and violence in anyone's lives. Bystander interventions right now give me great hope.
And what do you tell people to do to prepare in case they are ever a bystander to something like this?
Well, I really encourage people. The Women's Center is doing phenomenal work. There are 10 or 12 different departments, including some colleges, that have sent people through a training, staff or faculty through a training program so that they can incorporate bystander curriculum into their work, whether that's in student life or student affairs area or, like I said, in a classroom curriculum. So I would contact the Women's Center to see if there's a training coming up where you can actually learn some of the skills. The other thing is their website is phenomenal. There's a blog that gives, there's handouts, 10 tips for how to intervene. And I think the biggest thing that in my own life that has been helpful is to kind of think through a situation, or if I see something happening and I don't like how others are handling it, I ask, how would I handle it better, and having discussions, intentional discussions with friends or colleagues. I just left a voicemail message for a colleague where I want to run something by her because I wish I would have handled that situation differently, and get her feedback on what other ways I could have intervened. But a distraction, anything, an excuse. You don't have to be. The idea isn't to police a situation or intervene physically when you think something isn't safe or okay, and to not just wait for physical injury, right? But also where someone is being attacked or bullied emotionally, and so that can be telling a joke or trying to change the subject, separating the two people. We're doing a lot of that education with our first-year students through an online course called Informed. There are workshops on campus, and I'm excited. I think it will take us to the next level.
So in your personal life, as well as in your work life, you've been really involved with grassroots organizing, but also with public policy work. And I want to ask you, what do you think is the relationship between individual empowerment and systematic change?
I think they should inform one another. I think, from my own practice experience, it was working, one-on-one with people affected by violence, whether it was people who had been arrested, offenders, and hearing their story and their struggles and sometimes their desire to make change, and understanding that economic justice, not having a living wage, that there were a lot of stressors, there were a lot of things, their attitudes, their beliefs, things that they had been told and taught, things they experienced in their own lives that made it really difficult to just, encourage someone to make change. I remember one person I worked with, a man, middle-aged man, who said, "Yeah, those are great ways. That's a good skill, or that's a new attitude. I really like that, and I would like to be but this is my world. And basically he described what his work world was like with other men. And there wasn't a lot of encouragement to kind of walk a different path, if you will, in life. So I think understanding that the media and understanding that, economics, that politics all intersect and play a role in people's lives helps you see why you have to engage in not just one-on-one change. But at least for me, it motivated me to work on political campaigns or to work on legislative issues and lobbying and to see the connections. And then vice versa, when you're working at that level, if you don't understand how those issues are affecting people's lives and don't know the personal stories, I think you kind of sound like a policy wonk, and you can't speak from your heart, And I think change and justice is about, involving your head and it should be intellectually rigorous as well as your heart, and you've got to actually do something to live out your values.
So I want to circle back to your undergraduate education. You were a first-generation college student and, in fact, the first member of your family on your father's side to finish high school. What kind of advice do you give to other students who have a similar situation?
Two things come to mind. One, I think that even for students today, I could be students' mothers now, and, but hearing their path and their struggles, there's still a sense of maybe abandoning your family or somehow having to choose. Your world is opening up, and I wouldn't see it as a loss. I'd encourage them to see it as a change, to respect where you come from, to understand who you are, and on this path, and to be gentle with yourself, because it can feel bumpy sometimes when you head back home to try and explain what your reality's like on campus or what your new professional world might look like, and your family's experience or your friends from high school's experience is very different. I would also encourage people to talk about that, to write about it, to read, to understand that they aren't the first to kind of take a different path from their own family of origin. And then the other is to not forget where they came from, to kind of understand how that's shaped. I think that we can learn things and we can get knowledge and build skills, but all of who we are is how we work in the world. And so if we don't understand our own cultural, our social class experience, when we get out in the work world, simple things that I've talked with students about, like knowing what to wear or what fork in a setting, and you're out for a lunch and you've never had a gazillion pieces of silverware around you. Those experiences. I remember not dressing appropriately for, dressing up in a way that I probably should have, and I just didn't have that social experience. And so that's part of it, but I also think it was helpful to talk with others and to find good mentors who are willing to help support my path and my journey.
So you have said that becoming a mother is one of the most significant events in your life. How has having your daughter in your life changed you?
It would be interesting to to hear other people's perspective on that too. But I think first and foremost, it's that I just understand joy differently. And I'm less worried about the small things in life. And it really, for me, particularly at this age, becoming a mother maybe later in life, really allowed me to focus on what's important and to not get overly concerned about there's no other way to say it, it sounds trite, but the small stuff. And the other way that I think it changed me is to help me focus my activism or my work for the future. What is it that I want to do? And it's funny, I'm watching, right now I'm really overly involved in individual work. I'm teaching religious education and a lot of individual change stuff, and I'm feeling called again to do kind of work at the community level. And I think because she just started kindergarten, I'm really interested in what that school board's doing, So that's one way, kind of focusing my interests. And the other is just the joy, seeing the simplicity, the joy in simplicity in life, playing for a moment, slowing down and not forgetting to celebrate or be in the moment that you're in, and not rushing off to create something else or, write some new paper or prepare for some new event, but stop and play and enjoy your life. And again, that sounds so trite, but when you have a little kid calling to you, come play, or why don't you play Dora with me? That that it just makes you kind of really appreciate the here and now. and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, you just won an award for your work. You won the Jean Y. Jew Women's Rights Award for your outstanding effort or achievement in improving the status of women at the University of Iowa. You won the 2010 award. So I want to ask you, what does winning that award mean to you?
It's probably the most significant award or accomplishment that I've ever received for a number of reasons. One, Jean is a colleague, a personal friend, and a mentor. She was one of the first women that I met when I came to Iowa City and was the director of the center. And we worked on a group, we were on a committee that was starting the Iowa Women's Foundation. And so through, stuffing envelopes or working on that project, I heard more about her own personal story and the challenges that she had here at the university. And so to get an award that's named in someone's honor, that means so much to me personally. It was wonderful. But the award also was a reminder of the importance of the work that I'm doing right now. And it was and is, there's a calligraphy piece of artwork that you get presented with, and that's in my office as a reminder that to not forget the struggles and the people who came before me, and the costs that many of them have paid, and that there's still so much more to do when it comes to certainly responding to individuals who experience sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, but also as an institution that we can always keep doing better. And it was a reminder or a call to do better and to keep going. And her story and her experience, there's just even the judge's ruling in the case, he issued that all university community members, staff and faculty, employees should receive a copy of his ruling, and there were like 86 findings of support for her case, and to make it so public, all of that I just found very informative as we were thinking about revising our sexual harassment policy and just thinking about my role on campus.
So it's a Women at Iowa tradition to ask you to recommend a book that will tell us a little bit more about your point of view. What book would you add to our list?
I've been thinking about that question. I have to say that in my early 20s, a book that really kind of set me on a course was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. There are many books, and it was really hard. This was really hard for me to choose. But as I continued to think about that book, and actually the autobiography was written by Alex Haley, at the time that I read that book, I was being introduced to women's literature through a concentration in women's studies as an undergrad student, and I was discovering Maya Angelou's work and learning who she is. And I had a spring break experience where I went to Oklahoma City, which is a whole other story. But I went to an art museum and saw a photography installation by Gordon Parks, and he was an African American photographer. And anyway, in Malcolm X's autobiography, all of these people were friends, but yet I was learning about their work separately, right? So I think to see in a book how friends, that whole piece about individual change and how people help each other in their journeys and making change, but also to see how, and to know and be learning in different classroom contexts and my own museum experiences, that people were engaged in making their communities, the world, a better place, and they were using their talents and strengths. Muhammad Ali was a friend of theirs, and the book talks about, for me, there's many messages in the book, but knowing who you are is critical. Pilgrimages back to understand your cultural and religious identity. And the other piece, I think, that the book and his life, Malcolm X's life, spoke to me particularly, and still does, that change isn't static, that who you are, that your political outlook, the way you work in the world to make it better, changes, and it should change because the environment changes, and the tactics that you use change in response. And I think you see that as you read about his life and understand all that affected him and all that he used to make the world a better place. There are other books too, but that book still remains important to me.
And this story about Oklahoma City, do you want to tell us that?
Now, what undergraduate college student drives to Oklahoma City? I'm sorry, that sounds really bad. No offense to anyone from Oklahoma, but that's where I spent. And it was, of course, to see a boy that I had known in high school. So, but it was a great road trip, and the museum experience was phenomenal. And if you don't know Gordon Park's work, I'd really encourage people to look at it. It's very powerful.
So you're a woman at Iowa. What advice do you give to other women at Iowa?
Well, I think this is a place where you can grow and stay for your whole life. So I encourage people of all generations to engage in your life here at the university or in the community in a way that you make a lifelong commitment. And I think the advice I have is just the path that I followed and women in my family followed, and that is to engage in community life. And so find something that interests you, find other people that have interests or different interests than your own and learn from them. There's so much to do here. There's so many ways that you can serve on a committee and find your voice and find what's important to you and to use your talents and strengths. This is a place where every voice matters and everyone can make a difference, regardless of what your role is, your student, staff, faculty, community member.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Women at Iowa.